Do you know why this world is as bad as it is? It is because people think only about their own business and won't trouble themselves to stand up for the oppressed, nor bring the wrongdoers to light. My doctrine is this, that if we see cruelty or wrong that we have the power to stop and do nothing, we make ourselves sharers in the guilt. Hearing this quote today, when would you believe that it was said? And who do you think said it? A modern-day activist? A civil rights leader from the 1960s? Or perhaps an abolitionist from centuries ago? One interesting aspect of history is that we see the same patterns and themes repeated across the eras. Despite differences across space and time, humanity remains fundamentally the same. The man who spoke the previous quote was not an activist himself. In fact, he was a nameless book character. Upon seeing a horse being beaten and whipped, this character took down the information of the man so that he could later report his transgressions. When the character was asked why he didn't just mind his own business, the previous quote was his response. Despite being written almost 150 years ago, the sentiments that this character voices and the overall themes of the book can apply today. In 1877, Anna Sewell authored a novel about a black horse. Told from the point of view of animals, the book pioneered stories given by non-human narrators. In a time when women novelists were not particularly common, Anna Sewell could have been content breaking literary barriers with her innovative storytelling. But her book did much more. It shed light onto an overlooked welfare issue, the inhumane treatment of workhorses. By harnessing empathy in her readers, Sewell's novel changed the lives of millions of equines. So what spectacular book could have made such an impact on society? Why, none other than the classic children's novel, Black Beauty. Welcome to History from Horseback. We are back. Hello. So we took a bit of a break during the holidays and for some family time, but now Keely and I are back in the saddle and we have our next episode. Thank you everyone for your patience and for continuing to listen, even when we weren't putting out new episodes. And I'm excited to start this new year, and we have some pretty cool topics that we're getting ready for. So I'm excited. So, yeah, what are your... Okay.
So I've never read Black Beauty. Putting my hand up, admitting it out loud. Yes, I have never read it. I get... the only Black Beauty interaction I get is, for some reason, when I get too far into my horse enthusiasm on TikTok, my For You page loves to feed me scenes from the 2020 adaptation of Black Beauty. And oh boy, is that movie a ride. Like, I think it's so far removed from the source material that a lot of it is probably more just inspired by the books, or like by the book, than actually, you know, being a one-to-one replica. But yeah,
I have a feeling that's the case.
Yeah, I have a feeling. I know that the budget for the 2020 movie was like $24 million. Like, it was not a cheap movie.
God.
Yeah, it was not a cheap movie to make. I mean, most movies are not cheap to make in the first place, but at the same time, $24 million for a horse movie that I don't think it flopped per se.
I didn't
but
hear
I
it
don't.
did well, though.
Yeah, no one heard that it did well. Like, I think it was one of those things, right? It was made for Disney Channel, or like it was made for the Disney Plus sort of thing. And obviously it was also hit really hard by COVID because it was like bang on 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So like that didn't help.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest though, I think a majority of this episode isn't really going to be... It's not going to be me like analyzing just the book per se. We're actually going to get more into the history of just like how workhorses were treated in the past, and then how this book is a product of seeing that abuse, and then how the book possibly made some changes for the better for horse welfare. So I'll just touch on our sources for today. One of our sources is The Horse, A Galloping History of Humanity by Timothy Weingard. Like I said before, it's such a comprehensive book that I'm probably going to use it a lot in a lot of episodes.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And then Black Beauty by Anna Sewell, because I've read the book. We would not have the book Black Beauty without the author of the novel herself, Anna Sewell. Who was this woman, and why did she care so deeply for equine welfare? Anna Sewell was born in Norfolk in 1820 to her Quaker father named Isaac Sewell and her mother, Mary Sewell, who was a successful writer. The family moved often with Isaac's work, and so Anna interested herself in natural sciences and drawing more than a social life. At around 14, Anna broke her ankles and they healed incorrectly, preventing her from ever walking again.
Breaking both your ankles? Holy shit. That's insane. Like, I watched a sheep break both its ankles once.
Oof.
But that's because it tried to jump a fence and it got both of its legs caught in the top rung of the fence and they just went as it went over.
Maybe she did that.
Yeah, we shot it. It was really awful.
No.
But maybe yeah, we don't shoot people, so
good thing we wouldn't have the book.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I just can't think of how, like, fell downstairs, fell off a swing, fell out of a tree, maybe? It's got to be a trip, because, like, both ankles at the same time, something came past really quickly and clipped both her feet from underneath her. But, like, then you'd think that the feet would just come off. Anyway, sorry. Probably shouldn't be speculating about how a 14-year-old broke both their ankles.
Generally, the story seems to go that she was, like, walking home from school in the rain or something. Like, in the rain, on the way home from school, she slipped, and she severely damaged her ankle.
Damn.
But Anna refused to remain bedridden. She learned to ride and drive horses. This is likely where her love for horses blossomed. Horses provided Anna access to the world. Anna spent her life unmarried and childless, living with her parents throughout her life. Yet it was in animals where she received contentment. It is likely that throughout her travels, Anna witnessed a great deal of cruelty towards horses, an animal that she dearly loved and respected. Perhaps taking inspiration from her mother, Anna penned her one and only published work, Black Beauty, in 1877. At this point, I think I should give a plot synopsis of Black Beauty, since
I know that will really help me.
Yeah, I have never read it.
For me and all the others who have not read it, we're all holding hands right now. We're going to get the plot synopsis, and then we'll all be on the same page. Okay.
Yes, story time. So the book is about a black horse, and he's named Beauty at a certain point. That's when he gets his name. He actually starts out the book not really having a name because they're like horses, and it's all told from the point of view of him. Though occasionally there will be chapters following a different horse, but that's that horse telling the story to Beauty, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
And so it just starts out with him as a foal with his mom. He has a pretty nice life as far as like horses go. Like they're just out in a paddock.
Is this out in the wild, or is this like supposedly like
he's
on
on
someone's
a farm.
Property?
Yes.
Okay, he's on a farm. Okay.
Like there is he is on a horse breeder's farm, and he is a breeder. So like his whole thing is just trying to give the horses the best start possible. So like, when Black Beauty talks about his early life, he's just like, oh, it was really nice. Like, I got to eat a bunch of green grass. I got to run around in fields, hang out with the other horses. But he does, like, he talks about how, sorry, I might get, like, really in the weeds here, so just tell me
It's
if I'm talking
okay.
too much.
We'll get that.
Just there's a memorable part where his mom, like, talks to him and gives him, like, lessons and stuff. And so his mom's all like, she's like, listen, humans aren't always going to be good. So when you find a fair and good human, like, you appreciate it. And then she's also like, even if you are mistreated, the better you behave, the less likely you are to be, like, mistreated. Like, that's kind of like her view.
Mm, yeah.
And he's like, okay. And then he gets, like, started by the farmer, like, as in started under saddle and stuff. Where, like, again, his upbringing is, like, pretty nice. Like, the farmer uses, it isn't harsh with him, that kind of thing. Slowly introduces things to him, instead of, like, flooding him, that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
so he gets sold to this wealthy family, and this man is like, he cares a lot about his horses. He cares a lot about good horsemanship. He has, like, he's hired a really good, basically the guy who's in charge of all the horses on the property, all the carriage horses, all of
Like a
their.
barn manager?
Yes,
Or just like
yeah.
a
Yeah, like a
yeah.
barn manager, as well as he's like the head guy who, like, drives the horses and stuff. He's like their carriage driver.
Yeah.
Um and so this guy, he knows his stuff, and he's a good, like, horse handler and trainer. The family has Beauty, that they are the ones who give him the name. And Beauty stays with that family for a good amount of time, and that's where he meets characters who are, like, friends and are characters in the book. So Ginger is one of the notable horses that he meets, who is this chestnut mare. And she had a pretty poor start in life. She was started really harshly.
Is she what you would call a stereotypical chestnut mare? Did this
Yes. Yeah.
so the chestnut I wonder if the chestnut mare thing started here. I wonder if
I
this is where it
know.
started.
I am curious too. And the whole thing that's kind of ironic is the fact that people will judge chestnut mares and, like, go, it's a chestnut mare. That's just how they are. When it's, like, very clear in the book and said multiple times, even Ginger says it herself. She's like, I wouldn't be this mean. I wouldn't be like this if I hadn't been treated so poorly
Yeah.
younger.
And it's funny too because I'm one of those people that's like, I can laugh at a chestnut mare joke, but I'm also like, I don't really believe it. I'm like, I don't think like a random, like, misogynistic joke is actually accurate to why that horse is the way that it is.
Yeah.
I don't think it's got anything to do with the color of the horse and the sex of the horse. I think it's actually just that, there's probably something wrong. Like, not to get, like, controversial around here or anything like that, but, like, this is just, like, thinly veiled misogyny. Like, there's no reason that these jokes should make sense, but no one seems to know where it came from. It kind of just, like, has always been that way. Like, so it's interesting to see that Ginger is, like, a quote-unquote stereotypical chestnut mare, because you'd wonder whether it had something to do with this, or whether it's just, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, and I definitely wondered that when I was like, oh, that's funny that the red mare is like this. But it's also, like, it very much is, like, it's said so many times that, like, she is a good horse. It's just that she had a bad. So it was like, she was, like, not just, like, kind of mistreated in that she was not really started properly. When she was introduced to drawing a carriage, they used, and this comes back a lot in the book, but they used a bearing rein. So the rein that attaches to the back of their head and forces their head carriage to be high. And this is really difficult on a horse's body when they are pulling weight.
And when they're new, and, like, when their body isn't trained to do that for a long period of time, it's just how you end up getting false carriage.
Exactly. So she was young when this happened. When she was trained to drive carriages and stuff. Like, she was young, her body's still developing, and then she's being forced to move kind of incorrectly with poor posture. So it had an effect on her body as well. So it was like, she's like, yeah, I'm dealing with like pain. I don't trust humans because of what they've done to me in the past. Which was very interesting to me. Like, I'll talk about it more, but it's very interesting to me reading this. And I'm like, this is from 1877, and they're talking about horses hiding pain, and that's the fact that why they're acting that way. Like,
Yeah.
interesting.
It's like, damn, is it just me, or have we known all along?
I
Ooh,
know, yeah.
what an uncomfortable thought.
um, he also meets Mary Legs, who is like this little pony, and he's like the pony, so all the kids ride.
Yeah, not gonna lie, Mary Legs is an awesome name, and
It
I want to
is.
steal that name. What a great name for a horse.
Yeah. And he's kind of cute because he's just like he's like kind of the classic pony where like he loves the little girls, but like the moment any of them like bully him or kick him too hard or push him too much, he's like, I've had enough, and then he just dumps them in like a bush. And he never gets in trouble for it because they're like,
Damn.
well, you shouldn't have been like, you fucked around and you found out. It's
Yeah,
kind of what the
exactly.
parents are like,
Yeah,
which is great.
100%.
Um,
Yes, the way it should be.
yeah. And then also something that's like not really included that like not a lot of people talk about it. So there's also the ex-warhorse captain, who talks to Beauty about war. And he's kind of the first horse that warns Beauty. He's like, the most abuse caused to horses is probably caused out of fashion or things that were fashionable.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so yeah, so Beauty, he gets kind of these words of warning from like these other horses that have all kind of lived a little longer than him. And he's like this young guy who hasn't really experienced anything bad yet in his life. So he's just like, I love people. I love my home. But so he kind of serves as the one of the main carriage horses along with Ginger. And he's also a riding horse for pretty much any of the like young adults or anybody really. He's a very dependable horse. So I guess some more important stuff is that there is a stable boy named Joe. He's another character, who he makes mistakes when caring for Beauty, but he truly loves horses. And he eventually he gets like an offer to work at somebody else's stable as like their main driver. So he like moves up, but that means that he has to say goodbye to Beauty. And this is after they've bonded, so that's kind of heartbreaking. And this is kind of the first time in the book where you have this heartbreak of he has to move on, and this happens a lot. But so eventually, the lady gets too ill and they have to move. And so they have to sell all their horses. Beauty and Ginger get sold together to go live with this, like, lord. Except the lady of the house forces the horses to drive with the bearing rein.
Of course.
Yeah. Eventually, Ginger breaks down because she can't handle it. And she freaks out. And it causes, like, a slight injury to both of them.
Ooh.
So yeah, and so while they're both okay, Ginger, since she flipped out, they're like, oh, she's not going to be pulling the carriage anymore.
Is that the knees thing, or is that later
Not yet. Yeah, that's
I
later
see.
on. So later on, well, the thing with the knees thing, it's kind of important because it's the reason he's sold. But basically, the barn manager at this new place, he's good with the horses when he's sober, but when he drinks, he doesn't care about the horses. Like he's just drunk. He's belligerent.
Yep, makes sense.
So one time when they're in town, he gets drunk. He rides Beauty back, doesn't notice that Beauty's losing a shoe. When Beauty loses the shoe, he trips and falls. Because also he's being ridden really hard. He's galloping him home in the dark. It's just a bad, situation.
It's just a bad idea.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Yeah. Beauty like trips and dashes his knees on the ground.
Ooh.
And that's what injures him. And so then he has these really ugly knees. And so he's not fashionable enough to pull the carriage. So Beauty gets sold. And Ginger, in the meantime, she became the like hunter horse and the like competition horse of the young adult son because she wouldn't pull the carriage, but she had like a good enough build for it. But he didn't like exercise or condition her enough. So he rides her in a steeplechase and they call it she broke her wind.
Oh.
So she's just like, it kind of almost killed her.
Yeah.
So then you don't know what's going to happen to her, but she's useless in these people's eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So at that point, Beauty gets sold. He's sold to this one guy. He boards Beauty at this barn, and the barn owner tries to cut corners and cut costs. So Beauty's health suffers from it, and the guy gets so frustrated when he finds out that he's like, I just need to sell this horse. Like, he's not, like, I don't know enough about horses. And
It's such a common story though. Like that like horse is bred in forever home, something goes wrong and it just leads to a chain of selling and selling and selling and selling and selling.
Yeah.
Like it's such a common story in the horse world. Like it's actually insane that this was a storyline in the 1870s when it's like it's the exact same storyline that you hear from people in the modern day every single day. I'm part of a Facebook group, and you probably are too. Probably a lot of people are part of the Facebook group that's just exists and is dedicated to finding people's old horses.
Yes.
And I love watching groups like that. I'm part of Australian groups. I'm part of US groups. It doesn't really matter. I just love people finding their old horses and like finding out what's been going on with them. And a lot of people do find them. Like it's crazy how far the horse world stretches and how many people, can recognize a single horse or whatever if it's been sold that many times and it's covered that much ground and, been in so many states. It's wild that that's such a common occurrence that it's in this book.
I'm like, I'm in some of those groups and I'm so curious. Like every once in a while, I like use keywords like chestnut, Missouri, foxtrotter, that sort of thing, just to see if like Ace's old like first owner is looking for him. Just so I could be like, hey, he's with me, he's good. But,
he's good. He's happy.
Yeah. So yeah, because it's like then he gets sold again. He gets sold to this cabbie, or a cab driver, and luckily for him, this character, he doesn't have a lot of money, and he is like a working man, so his horses have to work hard. But he takes very good care of his horses, and they're considered part of the family. And so Beauty kind of really becomes part of this family and is with him for a long time, until the cab driver, he gets ill and can't drive the cab anymore. So he gets sold to someone that the cab driver thinks will take good care of him. But then he ends up being like a workhorse who's hauling like heavy loads. I think it's like grain barrels for a brewery. And the problem is that they overwork him to the point where he's like collapsed, and he survives, but again he's gonna be sold, and you're like, oh no. And then miraculously, who should see him but an adult Joe who's all grown up and recognizes Beauty.
Oh no.
And so it's sweet. And so then Joe buys
Is that when you cried? That's when you said you cried
that's
twice
one
in
of
this
the
book.
moments. That's one of the moments I cried.
Okay. Good.
Well, I said I cried twice in the movie. I cried more in the book.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
I think that, okay, so the other time I cried, and I'll probably cut this out. I don't know if I'll include it. But the other time I cried is that when he was a cab horse, when Beauty was a cab horse. So he was lucky because he was owned by his cab driver. He didn't see him as expendable. He was his business partner. But,
aw, that's cute.
Yeah, but back then, cab companies, if the cab company itself owned the horses, they would just rent them out to the cab driver. So the cab drivers would get a different horse, each day. And that meant some of these horses, they didn't necessarily get a break. And they weren't treated the same way, like you might be lucky and have a cab driver who is very courteous and cares. But then you also might get one who's kind of callous. And so Black Beauty actually ends up running into Ginger, and she's another cab horse. And her spirit is entirely broken. And she's just like ready to die. Like she's like She's like, I don't see anything good in this like positive world anymore. And she's just like a shell of who she used to be. And then later on he sees a dead chestnut horse, and he's like pretty sure it's Ginger.
No.
I know. And so, okay, here's the thing is that, like, yes, I cried in the book, but honestly, I cried more when he was just talking to Ginger and her spirit was so broken. But in the fucking movie in 1994, well, first it's like Beauty's sitting there and he hears her, like, voice, like her whinnying
Oh no.
on the wind. And he's like, what? And he's like, where is she? Like, but he can just, like, and then he's like, oh my God, that was her spirit leaving. And then
Oh my
and then you
God.
see the wagon come by with this dead horse on it, and Black Beauty's like whinnying to her, and she's not responding. And I was like crying. I was like, oh my God, I cannot handle this.
That's actually awful.
I was like, this is a kid's movie.
This is should not be allowed. This is traumatizing.
I know.
What the fuck?
Like in the book, it's just where he's like, I unfortunately, I see this chestnut horse in a ditch, and it looked a lot like Ginger. I don't know for sure, but that was, the last time I ever saw. So you're like, okay, maybe I could believe that wasn't her. But in the movie, they're just like, no, he literally hears her spirit calling out to him.
As she ascends to the heavens.
Yes.
Jesus Christ. They're like, you know what? Actually, we're going to make you feel it. We're going to make you cry.
Yeah, seriously. But so Joe recognizes, buys him, and takes him to live out the rest of his days out on like a pasture. And so, that's the story of Black Beauty. The novel Black Beauty is seen today as a classic children's book and is thought of as peak horse girl literature. The numerous movie renditions, many of which are altered or modernized, speak to the story's popularity. Countless black horses have been named Black Beauty since 1877. But, at least in my experience growing up, Black Beauty was relegated as a piece of niche horse culture. I personally never read it, even though it was the perfect book for child me, because no one could actually explain to me what the book was about. I honestly thought it was like the 2020 version where some girl like owned Black Beauty, and that it was like a literal horse girl book. Like, no one told me. No,
yeah.
It's narrated by the horse, and it's his life. And he goes through a lot of different hardships, because I would have read that.
I think some part of me knew that it was told from the perspective of the horse, but I think I only knew that because of a conversation about the movie Spirit. If I did know one thing, that was what I knew, but I don't know, like, it would have been from Spirit, which is so funny because, like, this came first, but yeah.
I didn't know. I literally thought Beauty was a girl, because Black Beauty sounded like a girl name.
That I did believe, yeah, that I did believe. Like, that it was, I always believed it was a mare, but that's just because, again, Beauty's a girl's name.
Yeah, yeah. The 1994 version did a pretty good job of that, where it's very much, like, still just from the horse's perspective. Like, there aren't really any scenes that you see that Beauty isn't, like, present for. And, like, one thing that was interesting is that, so, like, in the book, the horses talk to each other and they understand each other, so they have conversations. In the movie, they chose to have the horses just all whinny to one another.
Oh, and like that's them talking?
Yeah, and then it's like everything is kind of like through context. Like, you got to read the horse's body language and then have Beauty sometimes, like, clarify what they said.
Beauty's the translator.
Yeah. To understand the impact that Black Beauty had on equine welfare, let's peer back in time at what life was like for horses and the working class in the 19th century. Just over a century ago, horses were central to human life. In 1915, the U.S. horse population numbered at around 25 million, around one horse for every 7 people in some cities. Most of these horses were not considered to be pets for kids to ride around on the weekend. These were working animals. These horses had jobs, and unfortunately, a horse without a job was more often than not a dead horse. Picture a modern neighborhood, perhaps your own city or town. Now replace every car, truck, motorcycle, and bus with horses. Replace any farming equipment that has an engine with horses. That's a lot of horses, right? By the 19th century, Western society depended on equines in some capacity for almost every aspect of their life, particularly in cities. Those images we have from period dramas of wide city streets with 2 or 3 carriages trotting down the block is far from the reality. Most city streets looked much more like the bumper-to-bumper car traffic we see today, but with horse-drawn vehicles. This is the very world that the titular character of Black Beauty is thrust into at a certain part of the novel. Beauty is shocked by his new life and working conditions when he is sold to a cab driver. Luckily for Beauty, his new owner is a kind and hard-working man who cares for Beauty's health and well-being above his own. Not all horses are treated so kindly, and Beauty witnesses this firsthand. While Beauty's cab driver does not work him every day and does not drive him above a certain speed, other cabbies will drive their horses at dangerous speeds for extra pay. There were, of course, laws of the road and speed limits, but just like there are speeders and reckless drivers today, the same can be said about the past. Accidents between 2 carriages could be fatal, not only for the human driver and passengers, but to the horses as well. Unfortunately, workhorses did not only face death by accident. Soot filled the air in cities from all of the furnaces and cook fires, causing respiratory issues in humans and animals alike. Cobblestone and asphalt streets are hard on equine feet and joints, and without the proper shoeing, the constant concussion on hard surfaces can cause arthritis and other painful conditions in horses as they grow older. Horses forced to pull heavy loads or work hard for a long period of time experienced muscle strain, respiratory issues, cardiovascular disease, colic, and eventually organ failure. These reasons or more could lead a horse to expire while out on the street. For many at the time, the death of a horse was not tragic so much as a logistical issue. What do you do with a half-ton carcass? Beauty sees this in the book, having to watch dead horses, including his old friend Ginger, be pushed into ditches and eventually carted away. And I just want to apologize at this point for all the doom and gloom. I did cry at this part of the book and in the movie. I swear I'm not trying to just make you depressed.
That's just the book. That just comes with the territory.
Yeah. And this was the reality. This is what workhorses faced. I'm not trying to preach to the choir and be like, oh, abuse these poor, innocent animals. But at the same time, eventually they're going to break down.
And the worst thing is that that still happens to this day. But these days we have far more modern methods of covering it up and making it look like it's fine. It's so, some people are just so entitled. Some people have absolute insane takes on things.
It's such a hard line because it's also if you see something wrong, you want to say something, you want to help. And so sometimes when people are like, you're the reason, you're what's wrong with the horse industry, because I see that a lot in people who criticize videos. And it's okay, there's one thing to be a know-it-all who's criticizing a kid, and it's another thing to be hey, this thing you're doing, you're promoting dangerous activity. And someone needs to say that this is not right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the quote at the beginning. If you see some cruelty or wrong and you have the power to stop it, but you don't do anything, you share in the guilt. So it's a fine line. You don't want to be a know-it-all who's just you don't know what you're doing with your horse. But at the same time, Like, if you see someone, like, beating on a horse, you know, I'm gonna say something.
Yeah, like, what do you? It's like, what do you expect? You expect us to just stand there and do nothing? Like, oh, it's like it's such a line, you know? It's such a
Yeah.
line between being like, do I, see something, say something, or mind my own business and hope that they know what they're doing. But it's like such a clear and obvious difference between beating the shit out of a horse and having some difficulties with an anxious horse, or having some
It
problems
is.
and
Yeah, there
teething
is.
issues.
Another thing that's kind of the problem is that, like, it does get normalized.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
Unfortunately, in the horse world, because, like, yeah, they can feel a fly landing on their skin. The whole, like,
yeah.
adage of, like, oh, they're really thick skinned, it doesn't
It's
hurt
like,
them, is like,
okay, sure, they can individually twitch a muscle on their back when a fly lands on it, but go off.
but you, like, smacking them full, like, as hard as you can, they're not gonna feel that. Like, or they
Sure.
need, like that was like, okay, I have this story. I don't know if I've told you this before. I don't know if I've spoken to anybody about it before. I scheduled this trail ride for my family. For the most part, it was all well and good, but when she was first tacking up the horses, she smacked the hell out of one of the horses for, like, he started taking a step forward, and she, like, smacked him on the peck, like, real hard, and was like, back up.
Yeah.
And it made me so uncomfortable, I almost was like, let's not do this.
Yeah.
Because this was like a full, like, swing, and it just seemed so personal. And I was like, whoa.
That's the thing, right? Like when it feels like it's a little personal.
Yeah, and then she went on to explain to my family that what she did was fine, and that sometimes you have to treat them like this. And I was like, oh.
That's the thing, like when it feels personal though, because when it feels personal, it's like, hmm. That's like that. That's what makes you ask the question of what happens behind closed doors. If they would do that in
I
front of
know.
people,
They
what do
just,
they do
like,
behind closed doors?
yeah, like, she just did it in front. But then also the fact that she, like, instantly was like, oh, like, yeah, like,
Feels the need to justify and
yeah.
be like, oh, that's why I did this. And it's just like, if you feel the need to justify, it's because you know you did something wrong.
Yeah. I think about that sometimes, where it's like the people who don't know much about horses, they get told, like, they'll be like, why is their mouth foaming? And someone will be like, oh, it's fine, it's normal. And then it's like,
It's like,
meanwhile, studies have come out that it's like, why is their tongue turning blue? That's fine. Studies that have come out, they're like, yeah, no, their
yeah,
tongue's
like
turning blue
it's
from lack of
because,
circulation.
yeah, it's blood loss. It's blood loss.
Like,
I think that's what makes me so frustrated. You're trying to educate people, but people are educating them in a way that isn't sincere and isn't true. And it's
mhm.
like you're following one source for your information. Of course it's going to be wrong. You need to fact check these things. You need to do your own research. You need to come to your own conclusions because someone telling you that it's okay to grab the foal by its ribs, at a certain time, it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's bleh. Education could fix so many things, and so many people are so bad at it. They're
Yeah.
bad at educating other people, and they're bad at educating themselves.
I've seen, like, entire posts about it that put it very eloquently, where there's just like a difficulty in the horse world is the fact that there's so much, like, traditional knowledge of, well, my grandpappy did it this way, and, like, just because it looked like it worked for him, maybe there was better, more ethical, or more effective ways that you could do it. Or less dangerous ways, or, and then there's, like, the scientific stuff. And, like, it's crazy how in the horse world is one of those industries where you could, like, have gone to college, but if you haven't, like, worked on a farm for, like, 30 years, they're like, do you really know anything about horses, though? And it's like, I know more than you do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, maybe not me personally, but I can imagine, like, those poor people who get, degrees in, like, I don't know, say equine reproduction management, and they learn a lot. And then I imagine someone who's just a backyard breeder being like, actually, I've been at this longer than you, so. And you're like,
Oh,
okay.
all right.
Yeah.
Sure.
There was another issue that Sewell never touches upon in her book, but was certainly a problem in the late 19th century. Where there are horses, there is manure. Pounds and pounds of manure. City streets were literally carpeted in a brown, squishy mat of the stuff. During wet weather, the streets became a mire of what we affectionately call in Red Dead roleplay, schmud.
Good old schmud.
You can likely guess what that is. While nightly street sweeping crews were employed in most major cities, they simply shoveled the manure into large snowbank-like piles on the side of the road. When manure was carted out on wagons, they barely seemed to make a dent in the accumulating piles of poop. Also, guess what were pulling those carts of manure?
More
Horses that would produce more manure. This ticking time bomb culminated in something called the Great Manure Crisis of 1894, where politicians in cities like London and New York argued for years over a solution to the poop problem. It was predicted that if the cities continued on this stinky path, they would end up absolutely buried in the stuff. I'd like to say that an innovative solution was found to overcome the crisis. Instead, the manure problem slowly puttered out as electric trams and motor buses replaced previously horse-drawn modes of mass transportation. The introduction of mass-produced automobiles replaced one form of pollution with another that we would not fully acknowledge for just under another century. Can you imagine?
No. It's so funny as well because like you'd never see that in something like Bridgerton or like any
Yeah,
other
right?
period drama. Like they wouldn't be caught dead showing the miles high shit piles that they would have had to deal with. Also,
Yeah.
can you ever think about the fact that like in a like I think about the fact that in Australia like there's state people who are paid to go out and like mow lawns in certain places and just like do landscaping work in places
Right, yeah.
and just like keep roads clean and like keep things, organized and stuff. Same people. Same people. That guy out on the side of the road mowing the lawn to keep it lower on the side of the road. Same guy that would have been shoveling shit
Yeah.
100 years ago. Same guy. They're just doing different jobs now.
I'd say it's a little more pleasant now.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially because you can just sit on a ride-on lawnmower and cruise around listening to, your newest
Yeah.
Spotify day list that's been generated,
Yeah.
having a great time.
Yeah, it's definitely like they would never put that in a movie.
No, they wouldn't.
I mean,
Also, can you
granted,
imagine having to replicate it? Like,
I
it
know.
wouldn't be hard. It wouldn't be hard. All you need is like dry chopped grass and a bunch of mud, and you could just stir it all up and it would look exactly the same.
Yeah.
100%. But at the same time, still wouldn't smell good. Not after a while.
When I was reading about it, like there's so much detail and I didn't go that much into detail, but one thing that it mentioned that I was like, "Oh my God, this is such a thing in Texas summers when it's dry, where if the weather got really dry, all of that fine little particles of hay gets picked up by the wind so easily. And so it's like any gust of wind would just like lift up into the air and get into like faces and lungs.
Mm.
And I'm like, wow. Like the cities would have just been absolutely awful to be in. Black Beauty does not only focus on the plight of the workhorse, but also the working class. Throughout the book, horses become a sort of mirror for the men and women who work with them. Just as the horses are used by some with little regard for their well-being, working class human characters are used by the wealthy. One example of this is the cab driver who owns Black Beauty is definitely not treated great by quite a few of his customers. In one example, and it is the reason why he gets so ill and it almost dies, honestly, is that on Christmas night, when it is snowy and cold, he is requested to pick up some people at about 10 o'clock, I believe, 10 p.m. And they force him, they're all having so much fun at the party that they force him to sit out there in the cold for hours until about 2 a.m.
Oh, God.
And so he develops, his cough just gets worse and worse, but he sits out there because he keeps knocking if they're there, and they say yes. And Beauty was okay because he had his blanket on.
Yeah.
But, the cab driver himself didn't have a way to get warm. Now, these comparisons are no accident. In 1877, the same year that Black Beauty was published, a series of violent strikes took place across the United States. Called the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, workers protested their dangerous, unhealthy work conditions and their low pay with long hours. The very basis of the workhorse welfare issue comes from the fact that horses were so widely used. Many people viewed horses the way they would view a machine. They perform a job, and if they cannot perform, then they are useless. This ignores the fact that horses are animals with all of the emotions, thoughts, and imperfections that comes with being an animal. Sewell respected and cared for horses, and so one of her goals with her story was to inspire that same care in others. In order to do so, she told the story of horses through their eyes. Attributing human thoughts and feelings to an animal is anthropomorphism, and amongst the scientific community is typically viewed as a bad thing. However, I feel that Sewell's cause was noble. Besides, a majority of the feelings and thoughts that Beauty possesses in the book feel realistic to what a horse may actually feel. Can't speak for the movies, though. The 1994 was good, but I don't know about the 2020 version. Research has found that equine brains are highly developed in the regions responsible for emotion and are likely more emotionally intelligent than humans. Lately, more studies are pointing towards horses having the capacity to strategize and plan ahead. With our continued findings that horses possess intelligence and are certainly capable of feeling pain and creating bonds, perhaps Beauty's thoughts and feelings in Black Beauty are not so far-fetched. And if it takes a bit of anthropomorphization to encourage readers to feel empathy towards animals, perhaps the pros outweigh the cons. So, was Black Beauty successful? I feel that it was. In 1877, the newly founded American Humane Society gave out free copies of Black Beauty to inner city children. This had a two-part goal, one with combating illiteracy in children, and also in trying to promote empathy for animals and promote the animal welfare movement. By 1907, every state in the U.S. had anti-cruelty laws on the books. In 1897, the Our Dumb Friends League was raised to care for workhorses in London. This later was renamed to the Blue Cross Fund.
That's so mean. It's like such a, yeah, of course they would name it that. But wow, that's an awful name. I love it.
So
I love it a lot.
I thought it was mean too. I read up on it because I just thought it was silly. Dumb back then had a slightly different meaning. Dumb just meant you couldn't speak.
Oh, there you go.
It didn't necessarily mean you were like stupid. So like struck dumb, you couldn't speak. And so like Our Dumb Friends League was meant for horses. It was also meant for like animals in general. It was also meant for like really young children because they can't speak for themselves. But it is kind of funny looking back on it.
Yeah, it's one of those like modern moments where you're like, oh, that's awful, and then you're like, no, the words changed. It's like, oh, right, yes, that's a thing.
Between 1887 and 1897, the New York branch of the ASPCA put down between 1,700 and 8,000 horses a year. While this may sound pretty tragic, this organization was ending the misery of injured and ill horses who would otherwise be driven to work until their lives ended. So, especially at the time, they saw this as kind of a good thing that they were doing.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't disagree.
Yeah, they
Like,
didn't have technology or just the, the knowledge, the medical knowledge or veterinary knowledge in this case, to
mm,
really treat a lot of the issues that, these animals were facing. And it's like their main goal was to prevent it. This is another aspect of what they were doing. So, why did I choose this topic for today? It was not to make you feel depressed, nor was it to villainize those who work with horses to this day. I don't believe that riding, driving, or working with horses in general is abuse by any stretch. That would be a little bit hypocritical of me. For starters, I want to acknowledge how far we have gotten today. There are laws in many countries established to protect horses and workers from being used in an abusive manner. Not to mention that the streets of our cities are no longer lined with piles of manure. However, I was also shocked at how many issues in Black Beauty are issues still seen within the equine industry to this day, as you pointed out throughout this.
yeah.
For example, quite a few human characters care much more about what is fashionable than what is healthy and correct for the horses, and the horses' bodies pay the price for human vanity. One horse, Ginger, is not conditioned for a steeplechase race. The race nearly kills her, and she is disposed of because she's no longer useful for her wealthy owner's hobby. And I mean, there are definitely still people out there who probably do the very same thing. Where they're like, well, this horse is no longer useful to me.
I'm gonna shoot it instead.
Yeah. Or even like, I mean, it's like, if you think that selling your horse is the best thing that you can do, if you really honestly cannot provide them with the care that they deserve anymore, especially if they have like a veterinary issue that can't help them with, and then you feel you can confidently get them to a home that will provide them with that care, then like do it,
Mm.
then like awesome. But at the same time, we saw in Black Beauty, and this is still a thing that happens today, is just is constantly going from one person to the next, bouncing between auctions because, they had an old ligament injury that doesn't get disclosed
Yeah, like
to the
that's the
buyer.
biggest problem. The biggest problem is that people aren't truthful about it. People aren't truthful about what's wrong with the horse. So it gets
Hmm.
passed on to a new set of hands that tries to do something with it, and then they realize that they can't because they've been lied to about the capabilities of the horse or the condition that it's in, and then they have
Hmm.
to sell it on as well.
Hmm.
It's so funny to see, like, one of the things about the groups, like the groups that, like, the Find My Horse groups, that I see a lot is people who say, and like, obviously, if you don't if you were a minor and you had no choice, if you know, whatever, but people who say, I didn't want to sell my horse but I had no other option, and the person I sold him to promised me that they'd give me updates on him, and it's like, they don't owe you that. They're not going to. If they don't have to, like, it's not. And also, like, they don't have to update you. It would be nice if they did, but like, they don't have to do that. And a lot of them aren't going to. So if you can't bear to know what happened to your horse after you sold them, and you can't bear to know that they might have gone to a place that they didn't get the utmost perfect of care that they did from you, then don't do it.
Yeah.
If they've got so many
Either,
problems
yeah.
that are going to get them into problems down the way, and it's going to, you don't want to sell them on because they have a dicky leg and, they can't be ridden, and you're so worried that, the person who promised that would make them a pasture puff is going to put them on a meat truck instead. Like, then don't. Then don't sell them. Just put them down. Like, it is such an awful thing to think about. But like, wouldn't you rather know that they had a good run and they were happy when they passed on? Like, I would. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah. Because the fact of the matter is that, like, you know, Beauty gets a happy ending because it would be really depressing if he didn't. But that's
Yeah.
not what most of the horses get.
No, a lot of them end up like Ginger.
Yeah.
And that fucking sucks.
Another example of something that we still see today, the crooked barn owner who cheats horse owners out of their money by cutting corners on feed and not cleaning stalls. That's something that is also seen. Or it's I've seen a couple people pursuing legal action, quote unquote trainers, who they send their horse to be trained, and the person doesn't feed their horse, and the horse comes back skin and bones and worse than before. However, just how there are examples of neglect and abuse that continue on to this day, we also see love and affection. Beauty remembers every time a human shows him patience, gentleness, and kindness. He remembers quiet hands, or when his driver hops out to walk him up a hill rather than making him pull the extra weight. These moments in the book inspired me to be the best horse person I can be. It reminded me that sometimes everyone, whether human or animal, deserves kindness. And I hope that you, listeners, will also find moments to choose kindness as well. And so I will leave you with this quote: "If a thing is right, it can be done. And if it is wrong, it can be done without. And a good man will find a way."
Thanks for listening to History from Horseback. We hope that you enjoyed this episode.
If you like what you heard, please consider leaving a rating or a review. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you out on the trail. Ooh.
Ooh woo.
Put that in the episode. No,
Get a
don't
little
actually.
get a little wholesome.